Lesson 65, completion of local government. We concluded the last lesson about revenue bonds. Let's go back previously. Government bonds. When governments borrow money, they issue promises to repay debts, called bonds. A revenue bond, the government earns the money to repay the loan through fees charged to use the facility that the loan paid to have built. An example of that would be like a parking deck. A general obligation bond, or a GO bond, people who own GO bonds can go to court to force government to raise taxes to pay the debt service on the GO bond. By Constitution, the North Carolina electorate has to approve all general obligation bonds. An example of usually general obligation bonds are used to build infrastructure, maybe to build new public schools or renovate public schools. The idea behind the GO bond is that the issuer is the municipality. It has a percentage rate that is paid back to the bond holder, has a maturity date on it, an interest payment date, and it's a way that local governments can finance big projects. And again, the North Carolina Constitution requires voters to approve any general obligation bond. This is done through referendum. It's a way for citizens to vote on state or local laws. State budget. All state and local governments begin their fiscal year on July 1st. The General Assembly adopts a biennial budget. That's a 2-year budget. It's biennial. In even-numbered years, the short session, the budget is revised and adjusted. The state budget planning begins in the governor's office. The governor must propose a balanced budget according to North Carolina Constitution. This is when revenues or income equals expenditures, spending. North Carolina Constitution mandates a balanced budget. And usually the biggest chunk of the state's budget is for education, but you can see other components of the state budget. Health and Human Services is a big chunk. Justice and public safety, transportation, natural and economic resources. Health and Human Services and public education together was more than half than the state budget. Income tax is the main revenue for the state of North Carolina. The sales tax brings in about half of what the state income tax brings in. The state income tax raises the most government revenue, state government revenue. For counties and municipalities, they also have to have a budget. The city or county manager, as learned in an earlier lesson, prepares the budget. And again, the budget must be balanced. For municipalities, utilities is the major expense. This is water and sewage use systems, local electricity utility. Second is public safety. That's police and fire services. For counties, education is the biggest expense. And then health services is second. Public health, mental health, social services. For revenues, municipalities use user fees. These are fees charged for the use of water, sewage, and utilities. 1/3 of the revenue comes from user fees. And then property taxes, local property taxes, 18% of revenue. for counties, most their number one revenue source is not user fees, but the property tax. Both receive what's called intergovernmental revenue. This is when one level of government transfers money to another level of government. Most intergovernmental revenue comes from the gasoline tax. Municipal and county governments set local property taxes when they adopt their budget. To set the property tax, it's done on $100 of assessed value. Property tax rate. And you can see some examples of the property tax rate. Wake County and Cary and Raleigh are in blue. Generally speaking, Cary's pretty expensive. Property taxes in Cary are higher than most others. But that's not always true. As you can see, other municipalities had very high property taxes too. But looking at this chart, I want to stress on this particular chart that the numbers to the far right go furthest back in time. You can see Cary's property tax is pretty low, only 33.33 compared to Clayton with 54.54, for example. It's pretty high in Clayton. Anger, 0.53. Wake County, 0.534. How to calculate property taxes? A single-family home with a value of $200,000. You have a Wake County rate. Property value divided by $100. And then you multiply it, the combined rate, the Wake County rate plus the city rate. So in this particular case in Apex, the Wake County rate 0.678, the Apex rate 0.40, that's combined 1.078. You have a recycling fee, so you take $2,000 times 1.078. In other words, this person's paying $2,156 in property taxes.
Dallas King, please report to the main office for pickup. Dallas King, main office for pickup. Thanks.
Example of how your tax dollars will be used. You get this when you pay your bill, your tax bill, but you can see county schools, very, very high rate. This is on the left-hand side is the county, how the county spends its money, and on the right-hand side, City of Raleigh. I pay Raleigh city taxes as well as Wake County taxes, and it just kind of breaks down how your tax money is being spent. And again, it's assessed. The rate is on $100 of property value. And you can see last year I paid over $1,000 in property taxes. And that concludes lesson 65.